All right, this is part of a video series on the recruiting hiring process. This particular video is going to cover job description development. This is Matt Haver with Foundation Recruiting Consulting. Let's get into it. Okay, so your job description is the written way that you're representing what the position entails, what the responsibilities are, all these type of things. Generally speaking, I would say kind of the majority of job descriptions are poorly written. I absolutely would say, on average, job descriptions are not very good representations of what companies really need, what they're looking for, and a good way to present that information to candidates. So this is a crucial step in the process. This is something that I always do with all the positions that I work on. It's something I do for free as part of my recruiting process. If I'm working on a search, if a company wants me to consult with them, I can do this as a separate process. But so when you do your needs analysis with all the people within the organization, you're going to take that information and you're going to probably start from some sort of template, but then combine all that information into your job description. So these are the different pieces of the job description. This is how I'd recommend, setting up those different pieces. So I'm going to go into what should be included in it, and then also the way that I generally recommend structuring it. So title. One thing that I see a lot of companies doing is they either do this to be clever or to be cool, or for, I guess, other reasons. They think that they have kind of a unique structure and they have very unique job titles, right? Not all companies do this, but a decent number of them. Or they have job titles that are very generic. I don't recommend either one of those things. You want your job title to be the most concise and common way to represent what the person does. So you don't want it to be some very bland title that doesn't mean anything. So, like, I had an organization that I was very familiar with. So I'm in Chicago, but I used to be in San Diego. This organization was in San Diego. I won't mention them specifically, but within this organization, all of their software and IT roles were called programmer analysts. Programmer analyst is not really a title that's used very much these really for quite a while. Um, it's a very old-fashioned term, and they also used. So not only was it not a good title categorically, but they also used it to encapsulate all the software and IT professionals within their organization. So that included like systems people, that included analysts, project managers, developers, all different types of things, right? So whereas pretty much anybody in their software and IT be called programmer analyst, I would recommend calling somebody, a Java developer or a systems administrator, or even like be more specific, right? A Linux systems administrator or a DevOps engineer or whatever the case may be. That's the way that I would recommend going about titling. Um, and then if you have a kind of like management style, like so it's an executive role, don't come up with some creative title. Like if the person's really the COO, have them be the COO. If you want to have an internal title that is, some sort of branding piece, chief get things done officer or something like that, that's fine. It's not my cup of tea, but I can understand why companies do that. But don't do that externally, especially when you're engaging in a search, right? You want people to be able to very easily define what it is that the position is based on title. So be as common as possible and be as concise as possible. Um, Situational requirements, this is really important. So this is things like the location, the work arrangement. So if it's on-site, hybrid, remote, what the schedule might be. If it's hybrid, like how much do you allow, you know, the person to work on-site versus off-site, and if that changes from season to season. Uh, if there's travel expectations, either because the person has to go to other pieces or because it's a remote position, but then they need to travel occasionally, like 10% of the time. What are the scheduling requirements? Do you have weird shifts? Does this person have to have on call? Are they working nights and weekends? Maybe that's not a normal thing, but if you have any of these expectations, you want to make sure that you are clear about this and you include this in the description and you're talking to candidates about this. Um, are there any sort of special background screenings or security clearances that are expected for this role? If that's the case, make sure that that is very clearly drawn out in the description and is covered with candidates. Are there very specific cultural requirements? Do you have an incredibly fast-paced startup environment, and candidates, I would say implicitly, but also you should be explicit about this, should expect to work, 50, 60, 70 hours a week or something like that. Or you have a really fun work environment, and that's a cultural, less of a cultural requirement, but more of like a cultural basis. But people spend a lot of time together in and outside of work. Maybe some candidates may not prefer that. So if you have strong cultural elements to a position, you want to have that well defined and also cover that in your description and when you're talking with candidates. Compensation. You want to have a fairly clear compensation. Different states have different rules about how you disclose this. That can be sometimes a little bit tricky. What I would say is like you want to have a target compensation based on the skill set and the level that you're shooting for. Now, can you adjust that? If you have a target in mind, but then you have a candidate that's much more junior, but they're really a strong candidate. Yeah, you can adjust that, and you can consider candidates in a different, or you can have an absolutely outstanding candidate, and they're really stretching your salary range. But you want to have kind of a general target. I would say, generally speaking, it's good to have a target of anywhere from like $10,000 to $30,000 on the salary side. You also want to know, is there a target bonus? How is the bonus structured? It's usually based on personal plus company performance, but if there's a different structure, you want to know that. Are there any equity elements? Do you have benefits? Hopefully you do have benefits. What are the benefits? Are there any particularly strong benefits, or are there pieces that are lacking that people might normally be looking for? So you want to have all those pieces um, drawn out. You want to have a good expectation of what those are and be able to communicate that clearly, both in your description and through your interview process. Required skills and experience. So you want to keep the absolute requirements pretty short. So this would generally be like 2 to 5 skill sets usually. This is like what's absolutely required. Not too nice to have, but like if we don't have this, we cannot move forward. And then really deep dive into that. Like, are these actual hard requirements, or am I using this as a proxy? So this particular certification, is that an absolute hard requirement? Now, if you have a really big candidate pool that's easy to attract, it's okay to have more hard requirements. But if you're having, especially if you're having a hard time attracting, or if you're going for a really rare skill set, or candidates that are quite expensive, or whatever the case may be, you may want to relax some of your hard requirements, right? So what are the skills and experiences we cannot get by without, absolutely must have in this role? That's your hard requirements. Desired, this is okay, here's the 2 to 10 additional skill sets and experience we're really looking for that would be nice to have in maybe varying amounts of this is great versus, hey, this is just a nice thing to have. And you can kind of draw that out in those pieces, but try to push as many skills and experience down to the desired field as possible and keep the required field pretty short and pretty succinct. Also, try not to have, if possible, because sometimes you absolutely need this, but try not to have requirements that are based on like 2 different positions or 3 different positions. You see this a lot in recruiting where a company really wants 2 or 3 or sometimes even more skill sets in one position. And it makes it kind of impossible to recruit for. Or you can do that, but you kind of have to really be selective about, okay, what direction we want to go in with this? What's going to be our absolute hard requirements and what are our nice to haves? Do we have a couple different profiles we could go with and consider candidates, one set that looks like this, one set that looks like this, and those could both be acceptable, and then maybe we would build the rest of the team around that. So really give that a lot of thought. Soft skills, this is things like communication style. Um, there are situations where literally, language skills. So if you're doing maybe an international search, or if you need somebody to be bilingual, or if they're doing a lot of communication, you want to cover those pieces. Personality traits, cultural fit for the organization. These are all things that are going to be important fits. One thing you want to look with, and I mean, you can put this in the soft skills section of your description, but it really kind of maybe is an important aspect to cover during the recruiting process, which is cultural fit. There are large organizations where things are very well defined and you have kind of a small subset of pieces that you deal with. And then there are organizations that are extremely entrepreneurial, have very few processes in place, and really need people who can pick up the ball and run with it and be extremely dynamic. It's usually difficult to take candidates from one of those environments and transplant them into the other. It's not always the case, but a lot of times you can run into snags with that. Those are some of the pieces you might also want to cover on the soft skills of your description and in your recruiting process. The summary section of your job description, this is kind of just a quick overview. It's essentially a longer version of the title, right? So what is a short paragraph that encapsulates primarily what this person does and what they're expected to accomplish. Responsibilities, this is breaking down their individual responsibilities for the role, the things that will be under the purview of this position that are expected to be accomplished by the person that would be coming into this role. Then you want to have a section that has company and organization, company/organization. This is just talking about who you are as an organization. It doesn't have to be gigantic. I do see companies that do clever things. Again, you can go for that. I would say straightforward is, in my opinion, is the way to go. This is what we do. We're established, or we're a startup. We've been in business for a long time, or we're extremely dynamic, and we have an environment of risk takers. This is the space we're in. This is the industries we're in. Whatever the case may be. Just a little bit of detail about that, and so people can self-select of organizational fit, right? Benefits and perks. These are things that are important to a lot of candidates, so you want to have some details of, it doesn't have to be every single detail or super deep dive, but if there is bonus, if there's stock options, you want to include that, the type of insurance coverages, if you have a 401k, if there's a match, if there's tuition assistance, PTO policy, these type of things, disability and life insurance. These are all pieces that you want to include that are attractive aspects for your job. Perks, this can be office amenities, free snacks and drinks, wellness programs, flexible arrangements, so maybe you don't have a full hybrid, but you are really comfortable with people being flexible with their hours, whatever the case may be, or really fun work environment. You can put all these things kind of in the benefits and perks section of your job description. Key selling points, this would be, why does somebody want to work for this company, or why do they want this particular role? Sometimes it's because of a technology, sometimes it's because of you're going to be taking on a lot of really interesting dynamic responsibilities within the organization. Sometimes it's the hiring manager, sometimes it's the organization itself. These are all aspects that are going to lend to someone wanting to be in this position, and you want to kind of point it out somewhere in the job description or in the recruiting process to help people be interested in the role. So how do you want to structure your job description? I have kind of a standard way that I do it. For the majority of my roles, you can be flexible with this, but this is generally what I recommend. So you have kind of a summary section at the top that's bolded. This is going to be title, the employment type, so that's full-time, part-time, contract, whatever the case may be. Compensation, so that's your base range plus any bonus or equity pieces. And again, you don't have to be extremely detailed on all these things, but you want to categorically draw this out. Location and schedule, so if this is on-site, hybrid, remote, and then if there's any sort of strange hours or travel requirements. That's all in the summary section. Then I go required skills and experience, desired soft skills, and then what I normally do would be summary/responsibilities. So there's a little summary paragraph and then responsibility bullet points underneath that. Company, this is going to include details about your company and some of the pieces that I talked about before, and then benefits and perks. Now, you can play with this. So if you're doing like an executive search, I would normally have the summary at the top. If there's something very unique about your company, if you are a startup in a particular space and you're cutting edge, and that you might put your company information up front. Also, so there's the actual job description, and then there's reach out. So that's your creating content and creating messaging and emails and social media pieces when you're introducing the position. So you can do some of those pieces on that piece as well. So there's the actual description. So there's all the pieces that I talked about that should be included in your description, the way you structure it, and then there's also messaging around that. So that's kind of the general structure that I would normally do for job description. And again, you can play with it a little bit depending on the type of position. So that covers job description and job description layout. If you want to join for the next video series, I'm going to get into designing the interview process. Again, this is Matt Haver with Foundation Recruiting Consulting.